Hello everybody, thank you for joining. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon on key challenges for HR leaders in the return to work plans. I'm Lucy Fox and I work at Open Sensors, where we're supporting organisations from a technology perspective with their return to the office plans and also understanding the future of the office demands. In today's session, we're going to hear key challenges from HR leaders will encounter and how they will address them, what priority areas to focus on, how to minimise impact to employee wellbeing, and also to help you navigate the return to work and workplace strategies. I'm aware that from a technology perspective, the physical workplace is one element of that, but it's also a much wider spectrum. So I'm delighted to be welcomed by both Sue Warman and Emma Dutton, both of which I've had the absolute privilege to work with in my career. So thank you both for taking time to join. And I'll hand over to firstly yourself, Sue, and then to Emma to provide your introductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. So hello to everyone. My name's Sue. I've had a career of really building and leading HR functions, mainly in the tech and telco sector, but I'm currently VP for people for, as you can see, the AICPA and SEMA. Those of you in the UK will probably know the SEMA brand more easily. So a leading professional body for the accountancy profession.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Sue. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emma Dutton, and I am a self-employed consultant. My business is Leopard Learning and Leadership. I've spent many years both in the corporate world and more recent years outside as an independent consultant. And similarly to Sue, most of my career was spent in the IT and telco space. I've held multiple HR leadership positions, but in the latter part of my career, I've spent time really specialising in the leadership development space and executive coaching. But delighted to meet you this afternoon and to be here for the session.
Thank you both. Thanks very much. With our work with a number of organisations, it's really been interesting to understand and really start to get a feeling for what are some of the key priorities that you're looking at. And when I'm looking at some of the things on here, I know we're going to dive into sort of labour market, employee expectations, etc., but really looking at some of the data as well. So how have your opinions surrounding work changed over the course of the pandemic, and why?
Yeah, absolutely, Lucy. So I think it's fair to say COVID has undoubtedly and will continue to shift the paradigm of work. You only have to look at the data here on the screen to recognise the significant change that the pandemic has brought about in terms of how people work and where they work. So one of the interesting pieces to note here is that prior to the pandemic, only around 29% of employees typically worked remotely or from home. Over the past 12 months, we've seen that increase to 76%. I suggest it's probably even higher than that now. And what research is showing us that actually after the pandemic, there will be a 53% higher rate of employees working from home or remotely. And I think interestingly, what goes alongside this is the fact that whilst the pandemic has been really disruptive for many businesses, it's actually also brought around a lot of positives to us. And some of those positives are the fact that, you know, employees have proven that they can work from home. They don't physically need to be present in an office 5 days a week. As a result of that, I think, you know, we're seeing a shift in terms of how businesses are thinking about their workplaces in the post-pandemic era. And along the way, I think there have been a series of new skills that people have acquired, and those barriers that we thought previously existed have actually been removed. So I think opinion has changed significantly. And I was reading a Forbes article recently which talked about the fact that although the slide here talks about 53% of people working from home after the pandemic, the numbers actually sit up at around 87% from individuals who would actually prefer to work in that way for the long term. So I think it's really interesting because the opinions have shifted fairly significantly in a relatively short period of time.
Thank you, Emma. And Sue, do you have a view on that?
Absolutely. So everything that Emma just outlined has really been our experience inside our organisation. So I think the pandemic has served to really shake things up and to challenge the status quo. And it's got us questioning everything, questioning conventional ways of working and looking at the possibilities if we just unconstrain our thinking. I also see many positives coming out of this. I think it's accelerated the rate at which leaders are willing to embrace being more flexible with their people. I think it was probably a very patchy landscape before, some more enlightened leaders, some more resistant to that way of working. But suddenly when we all had to do it, as Emma said, it was largely proven in our experience that it worked well. You could trust people, they would be productive, they were committed to making it work. And there were all sorts of positives that came out of it for them. So that's not a universal statement. I think there were also some challenges, certainly around things like if people didn't have a conducive setup at home, then I think it could be quite stressful. I think it brought about some challenges on the mental health front for some people feeling socially isolated. But there were a number of possibilities that were proven to us that I think we need to take forward as learnings. I think the phrase we've coined internally is let's take the learnings and maintain an adult environment where we trust people to make their own judgments about how best to be productive on a given day, and to work with their managers to form agreement on that being a win-win for the organisation and for them.
Thank you. Now, so it's been really interesting. We've certainly seen a shift in sort of the engagement and how working from home and was perceived before versus how it's perceived now. Have you seen any differences as well from a sort of attracting talent and looking at the market?
I definitely see some possibilities there. So, and in fact, there are a couple of examples in my team. I've made hires during lockdown from people who live nowhere near an office. So it's opened my eyes to the fact that that people can be a productive member of our team, and that the talent pool I can potentially fish from is far broader. It's international. So it's helped me to unconstrain my thinking in that regard. But it's also it's created possibilities around if we embrace flexible working principles, so both in terms of hours and how the work gets done, but also in terms of location, it creates more possibilities for individuals. So, to give an obvious example, maybe a parent who's juggling responsibilities at home, if they were afforded more flexibility, could actually come back to work, could use their skills again. And so I think there are all kinds of possibilities from a talent perspective, both in terms of retaining people. I think if we're not careful, if we're not enlightened in our thinking, then not being flexible could be a negative differentiator going forward. So I think that's an important thing to focus on. But I think it really opens up possibilities on the talent front for attracting people too.
I was just going to say I wholeheartedly agree with you there, Sue, in terms of really untapping that broader talent pool and no longer being restricted by geography. And I think as a result of that, businesses will be much more global in their outlook and have much more diversity of talent within their business.
Which leads on to an next interesting point then. So will changes in the way we work change the shape of the workforce? Is that something you can see?
I would say absolutely. I think the pandemic has really brought about rapid evolution of skills, and I think businesses are having to adapt to perhaps very different skill sets given the world that we were suddenly thrust into. So I think moving forward, employers are going to have to pay a lot more attention to the changing skills requirements that they need within the organisation. And to Sue's point there, I think, opening ourselves up to the art of the possible. So thinking differently in terms of the workforce that we put together, having different types of workers in our businesses will actually make business much more able to attract that diverse range of talent. And I think as well, there's going to be much more focus on the need for businesses to change their approach to workforce strategy and to talent management. So typically, you know, from my own HR career, when you look at talent in organizations, you know, there tends to be a tendency to really look at those critical roles. What are the critical roles in this business that if we don't have them, you know, we're going to be in deep trouble? And I think the pandemic has shifted the focus away from perhaps those critical roles to one of a conversation more about critical skills. What are the critical skills, we need to be attracting, we need to be developing, and we need to be retaining in the organisation to keep ourselves competitive?
And just to build on that, Lucy, so I endorse everything Emma said. That's certainly been our experience. But I was fascinated watching how our workforce responded to this sudden challenge of we can't go into the workplace anymore. And what I saw was a more level playing field in how we made decisions and more accountability from everybody. So rather than waiting to be told what to do, people were coming forward with suggestions. And leaders didn't assume they held all the answers. They were open to the wants and suggestions from their team members. And I hope that's an element of our culture that we can sustain, that everybody is more accountable around how they use their time. So for a good example of that is people talk a lot about things like Zoom fatigue. And so people were suddenly a lot more discerning around how they spent their time and were challenging, you know, what's the value of going to this meeting for me? Is there a better use of my time? Is there a different way I could glean the information I need than spending the next 90 minutes on that call? And I really applaud that. I think it's really important that people are really questioning how to be most productive and having that open dialogue with their managers. So that whole notion of accountability has really been magnified as a result of this too.
Really fascinating, thank you. We've actually had a question come in from the audience. What physical impact do you see these changes will have on the office?
Yeah, we've been having conversations about this at work, and in fact we've had lots of suggestions about it. So our offices are modern and typically quite traditional, so bookable meeting rooms and rows of hot desks. And what people are asking for is the ability to be more intentional about when they come into the physical office. And what they're going to want to come in for is partly social and community, so to connect and see their colleagues, but mainly to collaborate. So what they're looking for is more big open spaces, whiteboards, projectors, etc., more collaboration space and fewer hot desks.
Yeah, and from my experience would echo what Sue has just shared there. So I'm working with a number of clients at the moment precisely on this topic of their future of work strategy, and very similar conversations going on in those organisations as Sue has just shared that's happening in hers. So, you know, themes around let's be more intentional about our use of the office, the expectations from employees being very different, which is, you know, if you think about the way that many employers have responded over the past 12 months, they've given employees that additional flexibility. They've given employees lots of support around their well-being, their mental health, perhaps some financial support as well. And I think moving forward, you know, in terms of that office space and office environment, there's an element to it that will be about, you know, let's use this space differently to come together with clear purpose. I'm hearing and seeing a lot of feedback that suggests, you know, people don't really want to go to an office just to sit at that bank of hot desks, as Sue has mentioned there. They want to come in for some of those social interactions, those spontaneous discussions that happen when you go to make a cuppa or happen when you stand at the water cooler, that people have been missing for the last 12 months. Feels like 12 years sometimes, doesn't it? Oh, especially January. Don't get me started on the month of January. But yeah, I think all of that will need to be factored into how that office space is used moving forward. And let's not forget, whilst there might be ambition and a desire for those office environments to be more collaborative, to have more breakout zones, to have those abilities to, you know, socialise and interact in a different way, there will always be roles in organisations that physically need to go into an office 5 days a week, or whatever the case may be. There will be roles that actually don't naturally lend themselves to a hybrid working model. So I think absolutely, taking all of those things into consideration, there's definitely a need to reshape the office environment moving forward, to adjust and accommodate to all of these nuances that have come out of the past 12 months.
No, thank you both for that as well. So this kind of leads quite naturally onto, though, what steps can organisations take to support the changing work patterns? Because it's been a monumental shift. So where can they start?
I think this is a really tricky area. So whenever I open a conversation internally on this, it's multifaceted and very situational. So what we've decided to do is to establish some principles to guide our decision making, and hope that that serves us well. And so if I share some of those with you. So one of those principles is to have as little policy development and red tape as possible, just enough to manage risk, but to not try and tie ourselves up in knots by catering for every scenario, because there are so many, and different scenarios will come and go for different people at different times. So one is to to have a more empowering environment where we encourage leaders and individuals to use their judgment more, but we keep them safe within certain parameters. You've heard a lot of talk about hybrid working arrangements being the future. I agree with that. And I think what needs to go with it is that level of accountability and empowerment to get out of bed each morning and decide, where can I be most productive today, and to work with your colleagues to align around how you're going to work as a team. So definitely the hybrid model is one of the principles. I'm really conscious as an HR leader of the need to revisit leadership and management training, and to make sure that they understand what it is we're valuing them for doing going forward. What does leading in the new normal need to look like? What am I empowered to do? How do you want me to create a future focused environment? So we're definitely going to do some things, some kind of intervention to help managers and leaders as we start to reopen offices. I think data is really key. So a greater focus on how do we measure productivity anyway, and how will we know that we're getting this right? I think we took a lot of false reassurance from because we could see people in front of us. We had a greater handle on whether they were being productive. I question that. But I think we need to decide what data we're going to follow. We're definitely scrutinizing our technology. So we're looking at an intranet upgrade at the moment to make it a more intuitive and satisfying employee experience, to be able to sort of lay your hands on information. And I think there are other technology possibilities that will help us there. And then finally, and we're not going to do this in a hurry, but we will definitely keep an eye on and review our real estate portfolio. But it's a question rather than a solid answer at the moment. It's likely that we won't need as much office space, that occupancy won't be as high going forward. But at the end of the day, we're involved. We have contracts, we have break clauses, so there isn't anything we can do in a hurry anyway. But we need to live with the question and work out how people want to work and how we can best work, and then reflect that in the investment we make in real estate.
Thanks, Sue. Emma, do you have any comments on this area?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to what I was just sharing previously, which I think is, for any organisation about to step on this journey and think about a potential move to hybrid working, it's about identifying what will that journey look like? How would hybrid working play out in the specific organisation? So I think there is absolutely a move across industries for businesses to move to hybrid working, and I'm seeing and hearing lots of different things. So I was talking to one organisation last week who, in terms of hybrid working, are thinking of that 60-40 split, so 60% of time in the office, 40% of time at home. One of my own clients is thinking about more of a 1 to 2 days in the office, the rest of the time at home. And I guess this is where it's really important to think about not only the role that you want that office environment and that office space to play, but also the roles within your organisation that lend themselves to working in this way. So a bit of a repeat in terms of what I said previously, but being really clear on, providing the right level of flexibility, providing the right level of empowerment, and to Sue's point, which I think is so crucial and cannot be undersold, this point about leadership and management readiness. So really paying attention to how is that going to work moving forward? How are you as leaders going to effectively manage a scenario where you may be in the office with half of your team and you may be in a collaboration space and the rest of your team are remotely? How do you ensure that experience is really seamless? I think back to my own times in the corporate world where you'd occasionally have that scenario. It wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and you would have the person who was remote saying, oh, can you pass the phone, Bahad, a bit closer because I can't hear you. So it's some of those minor details that will actually play a massive impact that also need to be given due attention. And I think as part of the pandemic, the other thing that has been accelerated is the digitalization aspect, this move to an increased reliance on technology. And I know Sue certainly touched on the Zoom elements here. In terms of moving forward and in terms of better leveraging office space or using that office space differently, I think there's a place to look at and what technology can help us with those things. So to Sue's point about, her team embracing this way of working and agreeing between themselves, when are they going to go into the office, who's going to be where on such days? How can we look at technology that will help some of those decisions as well? And let's not fool ourselves. I think I'm no expert, but I think we've all heard enough in the news and in the press that we know that an element of social distancing will be required moving forward. So for those businesses that are ready sooner than others to move back into the office environment, that structure will need to look differently anyway to keep people safe.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting, you mentioned about obviously with the way we're working right now and the pandemic being the reason we're in this situation from working from home. I think front of mind when people are returning to the office is also things like tracking and tracing. So being able to understand if someone is in the office and then, should they present symptoms, or when they go home, should they call in and present symptoms, how to be able to manage that from, being able to invoke your own protocols that you have in the organisation. Is that something you're also deeply involved in as well? And how does that get managed?
We're certainly looking at solutions. I'm collaborating with our facilities lead to look at solutions for that, because that will be very important. So just lots of logistics management. So if I want to go into the office, how do I book space? When do we know we're at capacity? How do I know the rights and wrongs of asking people whether they've been vaccinated, etc. I'm watching this with real interest at the moment across the countries that we have offices in, because it varies from country to country. And I think technology will play a major part in our ability to keep pace with all of that.
And I would agree. I would absolutely agree with that. And I think, certainly in the conversations that I'm having, there is absolutely a discussion. There's not necessarily a resolution at this moment, but there is very high up within the real estate leadership teams that I'm working with. There's a really high priority given to, and how do we plan for track and trace? How do we mitigate the risk of infection? How do we create this safe environment? What are some of the things we physically need to put in place within the office space? In fact, prior to the last lockdown, which feels like a lifetime ago, I went into a client office for the first time in what felt like a very long time. And I was fascinated because, and I haven't seen this anywhere else, some of you may have done, they had special things on the doors, almost like bumpers, and there were signs saying, you know, these new bumpers that they've added to door handles, etc., kill germs within X period of time. And so I think, you know, there's going to be much more of that around to keep us all safe.
One of the key things we're often asked is, you know, what should teams start when planning this change? What are some of the considerations that need to be made?
So I think, you know, this topic is huge. We've only scratched the surface this afternoon. In my experience, I think the fundamental starting point needs to be getting the right people around the virtual table. So really pulling together a cross-functional team of stakeholders and decision makers to start to plan for and flesh out what is the shape of the future of work going to look like within your specific organisation. I think that's an absolute must. This afternoon we're talking about some of the HR challenges. I think, you know, this isn't just a solely HR topic, it's going to touch every aspect of business. So really bringing all of the respective parties together. And the one thing that we absolutely must do, and the most important starting point, is listening to employees, giving them a voice, asking them for insight around what they want moving forwards from the office environment, how they feel about going back into an office environment, how they feel about moving to a hybrid working situation. And I guess coupled with that, and going back to something that Sue talked about right at the start, it's understanding that employee sentiment around, you know, where are there people who perhaps just cannot physically work from home for whatever reason it may be? They're in a house share, or their feeling of isolation is so extreme, they need that contact. So paying attention to those key areas.
I'll offer just a couple of builds on that, Lucy, because that's chiming very much with everything we've been talking about. So I think where teams need to focus are, what are the data, back to data, what are the data points that you're going to use to give you confidence that you're on the right track? What is it you need to measure, etc. Something about culture, we haven't talked about culture yet, but this undoubtedly will have a cultural impact. And I think being very intentional around what kind of culture you want to sustain or create going forward will be important. I've mentioned some key cultural words for us around accountability and empowerment. Okay. I think this is so tricky that we have to collaborate across organizations and be willing to learn from the best practice and steal with pride and share ideas, etc., because there will be, we're all learning at the same pace. And so I'm certainly very open to collaborating with other HR leaders on this. There will undoubtedly be duty of care and health and safety implications that we need to take care of. But I think my final point on this would be no large or sudden or big scale changes, because let's remember that this has worked, certainly for us, far better than we ever imagined it could have done. So any changes we want to make to that need to be well thought through and well planned, rather than knee jerk. You know, it certainly shouldn't be, so let's go back to normal, because it's a new normal we're looking at now. So we won't be doing anything on a knee jerk basis.
Can I offer one final comment here as well, Lucy? And that would be, you know, to Sue's point, we're all on this journey. None of us know how it's going to land. None of us know what the workplace will look like in the next 6, 12, 18 months. And I think this point around testing and learning as we go, refining, reviewing, adjusting, needs to be the mindset that we move into these changes with.
Thank you very much, both of you. They're really interesting points. Before we go into just the final piece, I just wanted to give some overview, some takeaways on this. I mean, it's clear that we've literally just scratched the surface when it comes to this topic. And thank you both so much for taking the time to share your experiences and share where you're at on this journey so far. It's been hugely insightful, but I appreciate some of these topics are huge and we've literally just literally skimmed across so many of them, but thank you. I think some of the takeaways from my side, and this is very much from both a technology lens, but also very much from some of the people out there that I've been talking to and supporting some of the organisations I've been talking to, is we've heard the word hybrid mentioned a lot, and it's clearly how the world's going to be moving forward. You know, there's those that, as has been outlined, that have to go into the office. They're not able to work effectively from home. But I think it's the biggest area is going to be that element of choice, that working from home is now a suitable option for you to choose to work from if you are able to, and it's how you can support that. I think being able to understand that and manage that, I think we've all been in office environments where the Fridays were very empty, but the rest of the buildings Monday to Thursday had people in there. You know, what will a hybrid world look like? Will it mean that it'll be very packed on maybe a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday, but on Mondays and Fridays still going to be very empty? And how is that managed? And from a technology perspective, being able to ensure people can safely book space and work in an environment that's suitable for the task they want to do is really, really key, and enabling them to do that. And leveraging the workplace data is really important. So we talked about, we're going to see what this looks like. This is a journey. We don't know what we don't know yet, but what we do know is human behaviour. We're sociable. We've already seen behaviours change and thought processes around working from home to returning into the office. And so we know that we can probably see that flex, we can see that increase, but what that looks like. So being able to measure the different working environments, understand how people are openly engaging with that environment is really key, to be able to map that out and follow that over the coming sort of months and years, to see how that engagement, and ensuring it's still fit for purpose and it's supporting. And definitely, as already been outlined, you know, thank you from an HR perspective. We know there's also obviously those that are supporting the workplace from an FM and workplace perspective, IT, obviously business leaders, and absolutely every employee has a voice of how they want to engage and how they want to support that office. So there's a lot more stakeholders to be bringing together. And we talked about enablement with technology. You know, people are going to want the same experience of, no matter how you are, if you're working from home or if you're in the office, I want the same technology experience no matter where I am. But also, if I am going in the office, I know it's a safe environment. We know social distancing is going to be around for a period of time, but I also want to know that if I'm going to make the journey in there, that I have the space available in order to do the tasks that I'm wishing to do. And technology is a way to help enable that, and that's certainly where we're focusing from our side, is how we support. I've seen one question come through which was around sort of the deployment or repurposing of conference rooms. Actually, the conference room and meeting room usage has been quite a significant one. I think at the moment, not many people see moving into, you know, I can't picture myself sitting in a boardroom around a table with 20 people, but are people already having those discussions, or is it a wait and see at this moment in time to see how things are moving? Is there anything you're seeing from your side, Emma or Sue?
You know, to the point around using the office facilities differently, certainly I think there is more of a move to using some of those conference rooms and setting them up more as, you know, breakout areas and collaboration spaces.
Exactly. So lots of good technology for collaborating with people who are dialing in remotely. You know, fewer chairs, more standing space, more space to move around.
Sue, Emma, thank you for sharing where you are on your journey today. Again, I'll reiterate, I know it's a massive topic and we've really asked you to squeeze in as much as you can. So thank you for trying to cover that for us. And thank you everybody for taking the time to join today. Our contact details are on there should you wish to reach out to any of us individually. And thank you all for your time.